I am Palesa Muchuminyani Mukhaitsu. Welcome to AN7 TV on your DSTV channel 405. You are watching ANC Decide. Let's take a look at news-making headlines this afternoon. African National Congress Women's League hits out at the results of elective conference after Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma lost out in the presidential race. ANC's Women's League says the African National Congress has failed women. COSATU keeps its card close to chest on whether Zuma should be recalled. COSATU President Stu Dlamini says anything can happen. An urgent steering committee called this morning meets to discuss alleged dispute ballots, vote counting and top 6 allocations.
In that regard, what we've now decided was that there's a need for reconfiguration of the alliance, that is an update of how the alliance functions, given that the conditions in the country has changed since 1994, and therefore there was a need.
The South African Communist Party says that it is ready to work with the new leadership of ANC, but there is a need for reconfiguration of the alliance given that the conditions in the country has changed. And ANC's Women's League President Bathabile Dlamini says she feels that the ANC has failed the women of South Africa. Dlamini says the Women's League cannot celebrate the new ANC National Executive. And she says the election outcome is a blow to women. And she calls on all women to stand together. Dlamini thanked Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma for her courage in standing for election as ANC president. But she laments that even Lindiwe Sisulu was not elected to the NEC.
We have to express our disappointment as members of the ANC, because we are members of the ANC before we are members of the ANC Women's League. The Women's League is at the center of bringing hope to women of South Africa, and we think that we've been able to drive the struggle for women's emancipation. What then does this outcome mean to an ordinary girl from Mutu, Mkandule, Nguyeshe? In the 105 years of the ANC as an organization and a leader of society, we feel the ANC has failed the women of South Africa. The ANC believes strongly in non-sexism, and therefore this is a principle that was put into action by President Oliver Tambo, who we are celebrating this year. President Oliver Tambo formed a commission on the emancipation of women, and he served in that committee, but also he ensured that women were represented in decision-making bodies, and also he had a confidence in women. Patriarchy has once again reared its ugly head. Comrade Jesse Duarte made it to the top 6, and we are proud of her because we know her track record. He is one of the senior women in the ANC that are tried and tested, that are actually senior to some of our male comrades. But also, we want to say Comrade Jessie was able to make it because she stood with another. Our common goal should be fighting and defeating patriarchy and sexism and the marginalization of women. The ANC indeed has regressed on the issue of women. We also want to take this opportunity and say we fought a good fight, and the struggle for the emancipation of women must continue. The ANC must take a decision on how women are going to be affirmed.
And COSATU President Dumo Dlamini believes anything can happen in regards to the removal of Jacob Zuma as head of the state before the 2019 elections. Dlamini made the statement during an interview with ANN7. A non-committal Dlamini said that Ramaphosa does not automatically have the Labour Federation support, although they had rallied behind him in the run-up to the conference. And he further added that collective has to prioritize before coming to such a decision. He also reassured that COSATU will be working with the ruling party to take stock of the ANC and the position of the alliance.
The expectation of the Federation COSATU is that out of this conference we'll be taking stock of what decisions they have taken. We'll be looking for a decision that say we're going to meet with alliance partners to ensure that the issues they have raised are discussed and closed properly, and we move on. I said that to those delegates. They said, Hewa, go for it. We heard them very well, and I think we're going to be doing that. What the outcomes of that will be a product of a collective discussion of leaders.
Dlamini also highlighting that the Federation will be working with the ANC in a bid to restore unity with the party.
The biggest question from some is whether President Jacob Zuma could possibly be recalled. What is your view as COSATU on such a move were it to be initiated?
Yeah, firstly, I'm very fortunate that I'm not in any social media. It saves me, helps me to have peaceful nights of sleep, because I don't see mostly the negativity that is thrown at people there. But that's on a lighter note. The expectation of the Federation COSATU is that out of this conference we'll be taking stock of what decisions they have taken. We'll be looking for a decision that say we're going to meet with alliance partners to ensure that the issues they have raised are discussed and closed properly, and we move on. I said that to those delegates. They said, Hewa, go for it. We heard them very well, and I think we're going to be doing that. What the outcomes of that will be a product of a collective discussion of leaders.
So at this point, anything can happen. That's what you're saying?
Anything is possible, because remember, COSATU makes a call, and they don't change that call, because they want the leadership of the ANC to come to the table, which is actually what happened. On the eve of this conference, we have had 2 political council meetings which agreed to set up a small task team which surfaced all these issues to work on them and report back to us on how we're dealing with them. There's a process that has been put in place, and we were confident, we still are confident, that that process will yield a result that unites all of us as the leadership, and will report to yourselves and say this is the outcome of that process.
And the ANC Steering Committee held a meeting today to deliberate over various concerns. And these issues on the agenda were disputed ballots, vote countings, and top 6 allocations. And Senzo Mkhunu supporters are dissatisfied with the results for Secretary General's post. And the supporters were seen breaking into celebrations, which turned out to be premature, as they realized that the winner was Ace Magashule.
On the process, it might be a bit mischievous, but we understand that only the commission goes on to announce the results. Yes. But something that I noted when everybody was inside that conference room, people were congratulating the president already. It seemed people already knew. So is it a process where delegates or members of the top 6 or certain members are told beforehand officially that when you come in there, when we saw them celebrating and already hugging the president now at this point, did you already know, or there were leaks? Because we were surprised, we could read body language that it seems some people know what we don't know.
Well, we all observe that. We've got some information relating to that. But we don't want to bother the organization and compromise the bigger picture based on those particular things, right? It's quite clear that some people were privy to the results before they were officially announced. We've got that information. But we'll not say anything about it. We must move on and accept that there is an outcome and live with this outcome and make this outcome work for the ANC and the country.
So let us now cross to Nasrec Studios to my colleagues Abigail and Stephanie Jansen van Vieren.
ANC can only resolve these problems if it renews itself. We must accept the decision of the majority of the delegates of the conference.
Comrade Cyril Ramaphosa as the new president of the African National Congress.
Much, Palesa. You are still watching ANN7's special coverage of the ANC's National Elective Conference. We are on the 4th day now, still joining you here from Nasrec and giving you some interesting updates and discussions.
Well, we heard those in-depth interviews, 2 interviews, one with Bathabile Dlamini, the other with Dumo Dlamini, just talking about the strength of the alliance. We know there's been some hiccups in regards to that. And also listening to Bathabile Dlamini, some issues that the Women's League had with the female representation in the top 6. To unpack those 2 interviews now, we are joined in our Nasrec studio by political analyst Mr. Jackie Shandu, as well as editor for the New Age newspaper, Mr. Ricky Naidu. Ricky, let's unpack those 2 interviews, maybe starting with issues that the Women's League has with the lack of female representation in the top 6.
Well, good afternoon. Abigail, I think we're raising a very critical point. I think it's a major step back for the ANC, most certainly, in terms of its commitment to achieving the 50-50 gender balance. I mean, the fact that there's only one woman, Jessie Duarte on the top 6, says a lot for the kind of regression that has taken place in this particular campaign. But also, I think the issue is, the Women's League itself will have to do some very serious introspection. While Bathabile Dlamini is quite correct, and the Women's League to raise their grievances around the way the elections for the top 6, was conducted. The fact of the matter is the Women's League, at the end of it all, backed a woman candidate, and it put all of its resources and energies into backing that candidate in Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, and neglected quite obviously, the other positions on the top 6. But of course, all is not lost. One would be very interested to see what's going to be the outcome of the NEC elections. Where the balance of forces lies in terms of the gender issues on the NEC. But I'm quite clear, the ANC Women's League itself will have to take some responsibility for what has happened in the last 24, 48 hours. Because the entire campaign of the Women's League has been thrown behind one person and not looking at the other positions, looking at the other candidates. For example, Lindy Sisulu for the deputy president. Of course, because of the nature of the factionalism and the slate politics, there was no middle road. Once the Women's League made a call, to back Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma as a candidate for the presidency and as a woman candidate, it then set the basis for what was going to unfold. And we've seen the outcome, last night when the top 6 announcement was made.
Well, Lindiwe Sisulu was visibly upset during that announcement yesterday. Ricky, what in your view would have then been a better approach for the Women's League to deal with this issue?
Well, the Women's League should have had a much broader discussion. It should have had a much broader discussion around who are the other candidates, including, I think the Women's League could answer that. Did they engage Lindy Sisulu? Who had her own ambitions, presidential ambitions. You must remember, Lindy Sisulu only came into the picture on the Ramaphosa slate, at the very last minute. Until that point, she was ambitious herself. She had declared herself as a presidential candidate. And by then, the Women's League had already, declared its preference in terms of the new leader of the ANC. And, so to backtrack from that point would have been very difficult. Unfortunately, Lindy Sisulu's response yesterday was unfortunate. For someone who claims to have a history in the struggle, a history in women's struggle, yesterday was an outcome that she had lost. And of course she was quite emotional about it. But again, it demonstrates, is this thing about just simply getting positions or dealing with the broader issues that's facing the ANC and facing the country?
Well, Jackie, let's come across to you. Do you agree with Mr. Ricky Naidu on the fact that the ANC Women's League did drop the ball a bit when it came to the top 6 nominations?
No, absolutely correct. And we must also emphasize that the ANC itself, because the Women's League is a league of the ANC, it's a structure of the African National Congress. The African National Congress itself, historically and presently, remains a very patriarchal organization, in terms of issues of representativity, but also in terms of the lack of real understanding of the scourge of patriarchy and misogyny in society, in the broader society. But to come back to the Women's League, we're talking about a Women's League that has been quite disorganized, invisible, somewhat irrelevant for quite some time in terms of the real issues of violence against women in this country. South Africa remains the capital of violence against women, sexually and otherwise. And we have not seen the Women's League in the past couple of years coming out. We've had a wave of gruesome murders of women, under very, 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 shocking circumstances. And we've not seen the women in the ANC come out very strongly to talk about these issues and to try and rally the rest of society, behind that call of the liberation.
Well, Jackie, I'm going to have to hold you for a minute. We're going to go across live now to our reporter, Natasha Perry. She is on the ground, just going to give us an update. Very good afternoon to you, Natasha. Thank you so much for joining us. We do know that the steering committee was supposed to meet. Just give us some more update as to regards to what's happening there. What are the developments on the ground?
Steph and Abigail, indeed the steering committee had actually just concluded right now, as we have reports that the new president, ANC President Cyril Ramaphosa, will be doing a walkabout with the media, and this is for the first time. Remember, he is the 13th president of the ANC, and for the first time he will be engaging with the media at a walkabout. And of course, my colleague Kelvin Okwu has gone to join them at PBF. But of course, the hot topic of today, that steering committee controversy, around 60 or more of these votes. But to unpack this for me, I'm joined by a fellow colleague, Patisa, who's been on the story and who's been covering these developments. Patisa, you've been on the story, like I've indicated. Just unpack what this means for us. What are the implications involved?
Well, Natasha, it seems like there is resistance. We know that about the 68 votes that everyone is talking about. But we tried to ask Zizi this morning. He couldn't give us any confirmation. So now we're not sure exactly what's going to be happening. But you know the steering committee has been meeting since early this morning, and the meeting is still on. I remember when Batabile Dlamini finished with the Women's League briefing, she had to go in to that steering committee. What will come of it, then we don't know. Allegedly, there are votes that were in a brown envelope, about 68 of these votes. What does this mean? We don't know. I spoke to Kwazim Shengwe this morning. He said that as KwaZulu-Natal, they're not going to accept a recount. So it's either they vote again or that's it, we stick with the decision that has happened. If you remember yesterday when Senzo Mkhunu, when the results were announced, he went up to verify and also look at the results himself because he didn't believe that he didn't make it. So we know that it's going to be interesting as to what that steering committee decides. The question is, did they knew about these votes ahead of time? How come they were not included in the initial count? So it's going to be interesting to see what they come up with, and also the implications of recounting or even having a new election altogether. So we don't know really what will be happening. We'll have to wait for them to finish, and then we'll find out from them.
It's quite interesting that you also mentioned the ANC Women's League. You've been in the press, we both were there, and they were somewhat lamenting, Cyril Ramaphosa's, new appointment as ANC president, saying that it's a huge blow for the ANC Women's League. Yes, history was made in that there was a female candidates that, were in the vying for being a president, but unfortunately this did not happen. She also cited that, it shows that there are still patterns of patriarchy within our society. What's your take on this?
Well, remember, she said that as much as this has happened, but they've managed to crack open a hole for them to sort of go through. So this is sort of a testing the water. Remember, this is not a loss completely. They lost by a margin of 179 votes. And we could easily say that the court cases did affect those 179 votes. But he was saying that as women, this is not only a failure for the Women's League, but for women as a whole, because they don't only stand for the Women's League, but they stand for every woman in South Africa, the women on the streets. She mentioned domestic workers. She mentioned women that are ordinary women that are working. So this is not only a blow for them as the Women's League, but they say they're disappointed. As much as they're disappointed, they know that they need to accept Cyril Ramaphosa, and they accept him as his president, and they will work with him going forward. But them as the Women's League, they need to do a reflection, and for them to decide how are they going to take this forward. We know we still have another 5 years to go, and after 5 years, does Cyril Ramaphosa serve a second term or not? Or are we going to see another woman candidate? And also talking about that, remember the issue of Lindwe Sisulu was also raised. Yes. That how come Women's League didn't rally support for her if they're supporting women? So it's just one of those that she didn't really give a clear indication as to why they chose not to support Lindwe Sisulu, if she did or not, and the issue of 50-50 enforcement of that policy of trying to force the ANC sort of to have more women representatives. But we'll see once the NEC is voted if they're going to include more women or not.
Talking about 50-50 and the NEC, we actually are waiting, voting to take place. But I mean, what I'm getting on the ground is people are actually fatigued, Patisa. Not only the media, but I mean, branch delegates as well. Just catching the feeling, they would have expected that today the results would have been out for the NEC. I mean, what are your sentiments? What have you been capturing? The branch delegates that you spoke to, are you catching any sense that people are actually tired now?
They're tired. Actually, not only us, they are tired. You can even see, just look at them walk. If you remember, on the first day, there was a spring on their walk. People were singing. We haven't had a song since yesterday. Today, there was nothing. It's been quiet. People are just walking around. So you can tell that people are exhausted, and also these delays are also adding to the days. Are we going to finish tomorrow? We don't know, because it seems like this steering committee, the meeting, we don't know how long it will take, if this is going to affect the closing tomorrow or not. But we will see. But we know as the other group is doing a walkabout to the new president of the ANC. So I guess the steering committee, maybe it's almost done. We don't know yet.
Patisa, you've been covering KZN for a very long time, up to, you know, this conference, elective conference. I mean, your experience so far gauging the atmosphere, NDZ supporters were very, very confident that she would take it. But I mean, the tables have changed as well. The mood is quite somber for NDZ supporters. Day 4 today, just take us through your experience as a journalist in terms of analysis. What have you experienced so far?
Well, I spoke to Kwazim Shengo this morning, as I said. He said they're going to take this as a learning curve as KwaZulu-Natal because the factions affected them. Remember, KwaZulu-Natal is the strongest provinces in this conference. They have over 820 delegates that were here, which is the biggest compared to all other provinces in South Africa, of course, followed by Mpumalanga. They should make a difference. But this year, because of factionalism in the province, it didn't happen. Remember, KwaZulu-Natal, they always have someone on the top 6.
True.
And this year, they don't. So I think for them, it's a wake-up call. I've spoken to a few of them. Yes, they're disappointed, but they soldier on. They're going to rally behind President Cyril Ramaphosa because they said that is the culture of the ANC. They rally behind the elected president, which is what unity is all about. But at the same time, yes, they're still disappointed, but life moves on.
Talking about the top 6 as well, critics have said that it's quite divided, but others have said that it's actually the balance of 2 slates, and indeed no candidates won. Still, Ramaphosa did not win, but rather the ANC came above, and this is what they were busy saying, that unity is sacrosanct, and others have been saying, more especially in Mpumalanga, have been saying that actually this is a definition of unity. This is what will actually eliminate slates.
But is it unity? We have one side pulling this side and the one this side. So we don't really know until we see it in practice if they'll be able to work together. Or if someone turns and moves to the other slate, we don't know. But we have 2 people with different ideologies that will be working together. That's going to be a challenge, and which will affect everything in the ANC. But of course, the new NEC is not going to have it easy. We will. It's going to be a challenge. Of course, maybe it's good for unity. We know that I had boxes that were playing this morning. Some people were saying that they're quite happy that unity won. So
yeah,
we'll see.
Quite interesting analysis and quite interesting experience from our journalist there, Upati. So just unpacking her personal experiences of, you know, the countdown up to the conference and the past 2 days. As you know that we're actually on day 4, and tomorrow we shall be, well, we hope to actually conclude. I'd love to have this conversation anytime further, but unfortunately we've run out of time. As from me and Patisa, it's back to you guys in the studio.
Well, thank you so much to our reporters there, Natasha, Piri and Patisa, for you just giving us an update on the ground as to what has been happening here at Nasrec.
Well, let's bring the discussion back into studio, still joined by our 2 guests. Ricky, this morning there was a controversy that started around the position of the Secretary General, vote counting and something that went wrong there. There was talk of a specific envelope that votes were not counted. What details do we have of this sort of discussion or controversy that took place?
The detail I have is what everyone else has been exposed to. I think the point is, I mean, depending who you speak to, you know, this conference is, you know, buzzing with little factions, little groups who are lobbying the media, approaching the media with a lot of stuff that, you know, one has to be careful with. I mean, I think for me what's quite instructive is the ANN7 interview with the Northwest ANC chairperson and Premier Supra, where he has actually gone on record to say there is a problem. And there is a serious problem where the Secretary General's, the outcome of the Secretary General's contestation is now in dispute. What I've been told is, you know, and Supra has been quite clear, you know, that if the matter is not resolved in the steering committee and not resolved politically, then they'll be forced to go into the plenary, and you know, where the matter can then, you know, get some kind of finality. Hopefully it doesn't get to the plenary, if there is a dispute, if it gets to the plenary, the consequences could be quite serious because of the expected, conduct of delegates who are for and against. Hopefully, and many of the people I've spoken to since I've arrived at the center here earlier today, is that they're hoping for a political resolution. If they don't have a political resolution, and Supra again is quite clear that the NDZ team is preparing to demand a recount for all of the positions.
Yeah, all top six.
Now, that's if that happens, it's going to be a very sad day in the history of this 105-year-old movement. The elections have been already hotly contested. It's unprecedented, the kind of contestation we've seen. It even makes the Polokwane conference look like a Sunday school picnic, quite frankly. To get to the point where the Electoral Commission announces the outcomes of a democratic process, and then the day after, an aggrieved candidate who's lost out on the position, then and his supporters are then declaring a dispute and crying foul, is quite serious. And also the president's speech, his opening address, his political report on Saturday, he went to great lengths to talk about this thing about the ANC resolving his internal problems internally. Resorting to courts, etc., is not an option. Now, it seems like that message didn't go down, clearly to many people in this conference, particularly the people that are contesting the outcome of this thing. But also, I think what's emerging again is the uneasiness over what happened last night. This is symptomatic of the fact that there was no winner taking it all. We've got this 50-50 balance in the top six that comes from both groups in many ways, and I can understand in a way why the Ramaphosa group is challenging the SG outcomes, because the SG is a very powerful position in the ANC. It's not, it's not the deputy president. It's even to some extent it's not the national chair or the president, because they've got other responsibilities. But the day-to-day running of the African National Congress is conducted by three people: the SG, the DSG, and the TG. And the SG and the DSG comes from a group that is, that's very clear. They came from the NDZ camp, while NDZ might not have got elected as president of the ANC, but her campaign strategy is very much present in this top six. And it's, my own thinking, it's part of this attempt to try and tilt the balance. Where this dispute ends is going to be quite interesting, because also remember, there's still the NEC outcomes in terms of the elections. Intense lobbying is going on in terms of the outcomes of the electoral processes for the NEC, which also is going to determine what kind of power this new president of the African National Congress is actually going to wield. In terms of whether he's going to have the space to implement his own vision, his own program that he's articulated throughout his campaign. Does he get a mandate from the delegates? Because obviously the commissions have still got to engage in their own work in terms of the very important policy issues. We saw what happened at the policy conference, a lot of outstanding matters. There's been no agreement on economic policy, RAT versus New Deal versus NDP, the organizational renewal of the ANC itself, electoral reform. There's a whole range of issues that's simply untouched because the conference has been bogged down from day one on this battle for supremacy in terms of the leadership issues. I think the other important point is in the point I was making to my colleague. What we've seen happening last night, when the election result was announced, is an outcome of decades of tensions within the ANC. And many people are scared to say it, but the fact of the matter, this is a historic tension between the exiles and what you call the insiles. Today, this top six, the top six is made up of people who fought the struggle inside South Africa, what you call the mass democratic movement, if you go through that top six. And finally, after decades of bickering and tensions, this MDM group that fought the struggle in the days of apartheid and was a front line of the internal struggles, have come to the fore. And this historic tension has been simmering since the unbanning of the ANC. I recall in 1991, the first ANC elective conference in Durban, when Nelson Mandela, the late Nelson Mandela, delivered his closing address. And he made the point to his comrades that going forward, the bridging of the tensions and the start of a new project where you are bringing the different streams of the ANC and the alliance into one single movement. That was a starting point. And that starting point has not been finished. Over the decades, over the years, you've seen this thing simmering. And, and we were talking about the ANC Women's League earlier. We talk about the ANC Youth League. Many of those formations had its roots, yes, in terms of history, prior to the banning of the ANC in the country. But many of the leaders of those organizations historically have spent a large part of their time in exile. Many of them have come back. You've had a movement that's taken its own trajectory during the days of apartheid. You've had a lot of organizations coming to the fore. And for me, at the end of the day, what we are seeing is the tensions in this conference is a culmination of a battle that's been brewing for many years. It's been swept under the carpet, because of the peculiar nature of this beast called the ANC and the Alliance, where the winner takes all kind of scenario. And we've seen it. I mean, I remember working as a journalist in the 80s, covering many of these tensions. And what we are seeing right now is, in many ways, for me, bringing to the fore a lot of those tensions. How the ANC deals with it going forward is going to be very, is going to be very fundamental.
If I may interject, I'm sympathetic to the analysis, but I would still insist that those differences between the so-called insiles and exiles are very selfish, are very myopic and narrow in their own nature. So it's not about two groupings who differ on substantive policy issues, in particular economic policy that the African National Congress must adopt in order to implement, to roll out what it calls the National Democratic Revolution, so that it liberates and emancipates the vast majority of the people in this country who are still trapped in conditions of squalor and degradation, whose dignity has still not been restored. Those differences are very narrow. It's fighting over a mass of porridge, over the gravy train. Who must have access to the state institutions? Because if you are running the state institutions, then you are able to redirect resources to cronies. You are able to channel out tenders to a particular group of people. So I think this conference is a missed opportunity for the ANC. For once, since its unbanning and the advent of democracy in 1994, to have a serious conversation about real transformation of South Africa. That conversation has not taken place. What has happened is that in the build-up to the transition, with the firm capture of the top leadership of the ANC by both domestic and international capitalist forces, the conversation, the discourse in the ANC shifted then, and they have not been able to go back to the real conversation that any liberation movement must be essentially about the issues of transferring power from a minority to the majority, transferring resources from a minority to the majority. That conversation has not taken place. RET, Radical Economic Transformation, as it was coined, was an attempt to say, we have to now talk about this conversation, because 1994 to 2017, all indications are clear that the trajectory is still the same. in terms of who has, who gets, and who are the have-nots and who don't get much from this supposedly wonderful democracy. So what we are seeing today moving from here is that neoliberal forces have won the light of day in this conference. That's the buzzword now. That is going to be a new deal, which basically means it's going to be another form of GIA, it's going to be another form of ASGISA, NDP, New Growth Path, all these slogans that the ANC likes that don't mean much in terms of real policy, which must translate into changing power relations between the majority and the minority. It's fancy words, they sound amazing, but when you look into what actually happens, then you begin to see there's a huge gap, more and more power, more and more resources going to a disproportionately privileged, already privileged minority. Unfortunately, those are not the major themes here. My colleague is correct. The conference from the beginning up to this point has been so bogged down about who must lead, as opposed to whoever leads, this is the policy framework. These are the objectives that we set for ourselves from here till our next policy conference, till the next General Council, or whatever other meeting that the ANC, big meeting that will involve all structures of the ANC. I would have thought they would say, this is what we agree on. When we meet again in a year or in 2 years' time, these are the targets that we want to have met by this time. That's what policy is. It's time-bound, it's precise, and we are able to measure it, whether you've been able to achieve it or you failed. And when you set it out, you then say, in writing, if you fail, this is the recourse. You know, if you are serious. Many countries have done these things, big change.
If I could just comment there. No, you're absolutely correct, Jackie. I don't think there's a dispute here. But I think for me, the issue is at the end of the day, the leadership tussle we're seeing right now is a culmination of a historic tension. You speak to many people in the ANC or in the alliance. It's a fundamental, tension that's been there for decades. And yes, you're absolutely correct. That in terms of the unrolling of the liberation process post '94, 23 years later, the fundamental challenge of transformation, the evolution of that process has its roots in that negotiating process. The negotiating process, my view is at the end of the day, too many concessions were made. Too many concessions were made for a fear of an implosion. 23 years later, that implosion, that specter of that implosion is still very much alive, because since assuming power in 1994, the combination of access to state resources, the promotion of self-interest at the expense of dealing with the challenges facing ordinary people, dealing with that triple burden of poverty, unemployment and inequality, has taken a backseat. Yes, the ANC claim, and it's correct, it's a correct assertion, that the ANC government has made progress since '94. But is that progress enough? Again, when you listen to the president's political report, the former president now, I think that's important to make that distinction. Even statistically, he talks about the number of houses that's been built, schools, etc., etc. But the much broader issue is, and this is where that battle is now, economic transformation. You must remember we evolved from RDP, went to GIA, went to ASGISA, or the other way around, NDP, now we're talking RET, we're talking New Deal. At the end of the day, ordinary people are simply not interested, because the experiences of ordinary people is not bogged down in this theoretical debate.
Correct.
And this is what this conference was meant to deal with. Has it dealt with it? No. We are going to have another lofty set of resolutions.
Right.
And this is the challenge this new leadership has to move beyond the rhetoric now. move beyond
Ricky,
the...
in the first place, is the ANC united on policy? I mean, we had this entire debate around white monopoly capital and radical economic transformation. Certain people in the ANC would agree with it and say that, yes, it needs to be implemented, it's relevant. Other people would completely disagree and say that, firstly, white monopoly capital does not exist, the radical economic transformation.
That is precisely the point.
Is the ANC united in policy?
The question is, was the ANC ever united in its real sense? Yes, there's been, you know, the unity depending how you view it. You know, it has been united, but it has not been united also. Because of the fact that, you know, and I go back to Madiba's closing address when he talked about bringing the different strands of the ANC in a united way. And the ANC is still grappling with uniting those different strands. You know, we talk about the ANC being a broad church, and that's exactly what it is. That is why you have so much of disagreement on key issues. The issue about economic policy, for example. You know, you have so many different inputs, people with so many different ideological positions. And at the end of the day, there's no conclusion, there's no fundamental conclusion to the strategic trajectory in terms of that economic direction. On the social side, it's easier to get agreement. You know, how many houses, the housing policy, etc., etc. But the economic issues, because there are huge interests, vested interests, like capital. You know, we always make this point that, yes, in 1994, the ANC won political power. In the negotiation process building up to 1994, the monopoly capital was quite prepared to give over political power. But the economic power hadn't really changed hands. You know,
so
the political concessions was fine. You know, Rainbow Nation, all of those great things. But the crux of it, the ANC was outmaneuvered in the economic negotiations by big business. Hence, that is why they're sitting back today. If you recall, in the post-94, there was a lot of trepidation of, you know, capital flight and, you know, all of... So the ANC put into process a number of things to keep them calm.
The ANC, to put it different, was won over, in my view.
Yes,
by
probably.
Both domestic and international. It was not an outmaneuver. You had a petty bourgeois, political elite of the ANC, with clear, well-accumulated ambitions, very keen itself to clinch a deal. Let's be honest, let's be candid, let's call things by their name and how history has unfolded. Funny enough, the guy who's just ascended to the presidency of the ANC today was key among those guys. You know, and that's why they preferred him also to lead negotiations and to be part of, to lead the, you know, the constitutional sort of discussion, because they needed, obviously, a judicial framework.
But they've elected the delegates, the 4,000, I'm even confused about the number, whether it's 4,700 or 4,701 or whatever. But the fact of the matter...
68.
And I think that's an important point that we need to keep in mind. You know, quite often when we engage in this debate, we tend to underestimate the intellectual capacity of those delegates that are sitting there, who come from ordinary branches, who might have not be sophisticated like some of the guys sitting here in the media lounge, but they can articulate policy, they can debate policy. They've given this leadership a mandate by electing them, as narrow as it was. Despite the contestation, etc., etc., the fact that they've given this top six a mandate, and later today there'll be a further mandate for the highest decision-making body of this organization, the NEC. Question is, how is the ANC going to actually use that mandate? That's the fundamental question.
I think, Ricky, let's unpack, you know, the election of the NEC. Talk us through, you know, what the NEC is, that process, and what ultimately those people's jobs are in bettering the lives of South Africans.
Well, the NEC is the highest decision-making body in the ANC, in between conferences. Conference, of course, is the highest decision-making body, but in between conferences. So the NEC has a very important role to play. You know, from a policy point of view, from holding the executive, the top six accountable, to ensuring that, you know, the organization's policies, etc., are implemented as approved by this conference. So it's not a very you know, light role that the NEC. I mean, it is a very important body. For example, you know, there's been already a debate of on whether the former president will be recalled as president of the country. That decision has got to be made by the NEC, not by the new president. He can't unilaterally wake up in the morning and say, I'm now recalling President Zuma as president of the country, or I want you to resign. It's got to be a decision of the ANC, because the ANC gets its mandate from conference in terms of implementation of policy, in terms of the day-to-day running of the organization, etc. So it's a very important role.
Mr. Ricky, sorry,
yeah?
you can continue.
It may be of significance, if I may come in.
Yeah.
It may be of significance also to add that historic, from the first democratic government of 1994, you speak about what is supposed to be a very effective, influential, powerful National Executive Committee of the African National Congress, which correctly must work hand in hand with the working committee as well as the officials. How capital also captures the NEC, we've seen it, particularly over the last decade. You find that people who become NEC members of the ANC soon thereafter or before suddenly sit on as non-executive directors in many JSE-listed company boards, you know, and they get very handsome financial rewards by sitting on this or that board. And obviously, that goes a long way also in terms of influencing the kinds of discussions that happen at NEC level and the decisions ultimately that are taken by the NEC. One would have thought that if the ANC really wants to reassert itself and capture back its own voice, its own power and identity. It's interesting, Stumo Dlamini was saying yesterday that the ANC resolved in Polokwane 2007 to abolish labor brokers. And they only did something about it last year to regulate them, not ban them. So in 2012, if everything worked normally, this would have been a key issue being discussed, that in 2007 we said labor brokers must be banned, but we sit again in Mangaung in 2012, labor brokers are still with us. But we sit again in 2017 when labor brokers are still under regulation, but it's clear that capital is still able to outmaneuver itself and still be able to subject the working people of this country under those very exploitative conditions. So we hope that attention, perhaps from today with commissions, really shifts away from personalities and individual leaders. And it goes into the substantive issues. And if you were to ask me what are the substantive issues, of course the land issue is very substantive, completely unresolved, completely failed pieces of legislations and policies, willing buyer, willing seller, and so on and so forth, has not worked. Spectre of land reform haunts the ANC government.
Jackie, I'm sorry, I have to stop you just there. We will come back to the conversation. We had an interview this morning with the Northwest Premier Suprama Humapelo, and let's just take a listen into what he had to say.
Firstly, as the province, we accept the outcome of the democratic process of the ANC, and we support the election of this collective of the officials of the African National Congress led by Comrade Cyril Ramaphosa. It's part of the democracy of the ANC. You must live and internalize the outcomes of the democratic processes of the African National Congress, because we must build this movement, build its unity, strengthen its cohesion, and move forward. We thought we will win and emerge with Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma. It didn't happen. It's part of democracy in the African National Congress. We are not bitter. We addressed our delegates yesterday evening, all of them throughout the country, those who were supporting NDZ. This morning again at 9 o'clock, we addressed them and said, comrades, we must support the new leadership. All of them accepted the results that were announced yesterday. That's why we are a bit concerned when we hear that some delegates are challenging some of the results of the top 6. That's very dangerous for the revolution in this country. And I will urge those comrades to raise their matter in the steering committee, and it must end there. Because when it comes to plenary, we just discussed that matter now before I came here with our delegates. Their mandate is clear. If it comes to plenary, the Northwest will say, we don't know who voted who how, because this is a secret ballot. You can't therefore target one position. So our position is very clear as a province. If they call for the recounting, we are going to call for the rerun of the entire top 6 positions.
There's also been talk around Mr. Ace Magashule, controversy around him, people not wanting him in the top 6. Have you heard of these sort of speculations, and what is the reaction around
Well,
this?
people have been raising issues about all of us. I mean, if you are a leader, you must expect that people will raise issues about you. If issues are not raised about you as a leader, then there's something wrong with you. We must investigate why some issues are not being raised about you, because society will not perceive you the same way. Society will not receive you the same way. Other people will concoct things against you. Others will make sure that they become obstacles in how you lead in society. As a leader, it's always to humble yourself, accept the criticism, both the constructive and the destructive criticism, and as a leader, focus on your strategic objective. So I said to Comrade Ace, you know that people are going to raise so many issues about you. He knows that. So he must be ready for that and focus on his work as the Secretary General. We need to build the organization. The credibility of the administration of the ANC at Luthuli House has been a bit of a challenge for some years now. We must restore that so that all the branches and members, I mean, people don't have cards. You join the ANC and then you can't have a card, right, for 10 years. So we must address those things. People must have their cards. We must sort out the membership system, the running of the branches of the ANC, the induction programs, the politicization of the entire organization in the country, and then the ANC will be fine.
But we cannot ignore the numbers, at least the top 6, how it looks now. It's 50-50. Some have put a positive spin to it. This is unity, as they say. But also we could say these members, because they supported 2 different candidates, to a certain extent, differ fundamentally on ideology. Yes, it's a nationalist movement, but ideologically where they wanted to take the ANC could differ. So are ANC members not going to be seeing a frustration of processes here, where if one grouping wants to go this way in terms of implementing policies of the ANC, the other could frustrate the processes? So are we going to see them unite even ideologically and find a common position?
Ideologically, we are a revolutionary African nationalist movement and a disciplined force of the left. That is the ideology of the African National Congress. Any member or leader of the ANC has to lead in the context of that ideology and that positioning of the African National Congress. We are an organization that is taking a resolution in Mangaung on radical socio-economic transformation. All the leaders who have been elected now must say, how do we implement radical socio-economic transformation? It's not whether you can implement it. It's how do you implement it in an accelerated manner. Our proposal from Northwest is very simple. We are saying we must pronounce 10 years of radical socio-economic transformation within the broader 30 years of the National Development Plan. So we must have 10 to 15 years of radical socio-economic transformation. And we must then say, we're going to do the following 9 or 7 things or 5 things to implement this particular matter, as it relates to banks, as it relates to the land question in the country, as it relates to education, the creation of jobs. We think, for instance, that allocation of budgets from Treasury must no longer be according to the Finance and Fiscal Commission formula. It must be based on variables that include poverty. So you must say, where is poverty embedded in the country? And based on percentage of embeddedness of poverty in the country, you must then allocate resources from Treasury according to that. Currently, it is the opposite. Provinces like Gauteng, because of population, they get more budget. And we, the poor provinces, we get less. So that's what we are pushing for as part of radical economic transformation. And we also want a date of commencement of the State Bank. right? There must be a date, there must be a process, and there must be a date to say we are starting on this particular date. On land, we are very clear on land. The Constitution says that when you expropriate land, it must be based on market value. Now, market value, when you do that expropriation of land as government, the owners of the land then, based on the market value, they inflate the prices of land. It means we'll never afford land in this particular country. So we are calling for the amendment of the Constitution to take out that part that talks about the market value. We think the state, through some process in the Constitution, must determine the price of land. That's why we call it a reconciliation and healing land price tag. So that for a particular period of years, 20 to 30 years, we must say we are healing as a country. As part of reconciliation, we are taking Mandela's legacy forward. There must be a win-win and a lose-lose.
What about the expropriation bill? Is it not suitable in this respect, or you want more than just the expropriation bill?
We must remove the market element in the Constitution. As long as it's still there, we are going to have a problem, because people will take you to court and you lose the case in court as the state.
Let's come back to the issues around the elective conference. Yesterday we heard the announcement of the top 6, but this morning and today there seems to be a little bit of controversy around the vote counting process. Talk us through, and there's also been an urgent meeting called as well.
Yes.
Talk us through what is the issue with the vote counting process.
You know, I don't know the details, but let me just explain the process to you. All the 9 provinces are represented in the Electoral Commission. The Electoral Commission is supported by Election, which is a technical agency to help the Electoral Commission. In the counting, all the provinces and the leagues, Women's League, Youth League, Veterans League, were represented in the counting. Every province sent 2 people, right?
I'll chat there with Mr. Supra Mahamopelo earlier today, touching on a number of issues. One of those, the controversy around the vote counting. But let's go over to our reporter, Sindisiwe Twala. She's coming to us live from Nasrec here in Johannesburg, just to talk us through the latest details. Good afternoon to you, Sindisiwe. We do know that President of the ANC, Cyril Ramaphosa, did a walkabout here at Nasrec. Just talk us through what happened.
A very good day to you as well as the viewers at home. I can't talk extensively about the walkabout because it's still going on. We know that my colleague Valerie Robinson as well as Keldon are part of that particular walkthrough. But what I can make mention of is a very crucial thing emanating from this particular conference. We know that just after the top 6 has been elected, the other members or additional members of the NEC are also expected to be elected. We know that yesterday the nominations were concluded with some surprises on the list and some declining nominations. We know the likes of Fikile Mbalula, we know the likes of Malusi Kikaba, Balega Mbete were also regulars on the list. We know that they also form part of the previous NEC. But other names also coming onto the list is the likes of Carl Niehaus. Carl Niehaus has been a campaigner for NDZ. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, we know that Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, who came second to Cyril Ramaphosa as it was a close race, has also accepted nomination to be on the NEC. A surprise was Winnie Mandela, a veteran of the ANC, the mother of the ANC, who's still well respected and regarded, has also accepted nomination to be on the list. But we know that while speaking to different people in the width and breadth of Gauteng, they were saying that they want more young people in the NEC. They want more representation in the leadership structure of the African National Congress. They're not quite pleased with just having a few people on it. We know that Melusi Kikaba represents the young, but another person who's also in is the ANC Youth League Deputy President Ronald Lamula, who's also nominated on the list, but also showed nothing surprising from that NEC. We also saw a couple of other names declining, like the likes of Andile Lungisa as well as Khalima Motlante, also declining to be NEC members. So it's quite a mix that we've been seeing.
Well, thank you so much to our reporter there, Sindisiwe Twala. We are going to go across live to Golden Ongma as well. She is on the ground. Well, she was there where Cyril Ramaphosa is still doing the walkabout. A very good afternoon to you, Golden. Just tell us a bit about what happened. What has Cyril Ramaphosa done in the walkabout so far, people that he's met?
Well, we will be crossing to Calden shortly. We do know that she is along that walkabout with ANC President Mr. Cyril Ramaphosa, and as soon as we have the opportunity to chat to her about it, we will do that. Let's bring the discussion back into studio. We are still joined by Mr. Jackie Shandu here in studio, and also joining us now is Mr. Muhsin Williams. Mr. Williams, let's bring the conversation to you. Let's go back to the topic of the strength of the alliance. We spoke to alliance partners earlier today. We also heard them briefing the media just before that announcement of these top 6 took place. Talk us through the importance of a strong alliance.
Well, alliance, you know, it's a long history within the African National Congress. Of course, it's a different kind of history in exile and a different kind of history after the unbanning. And the alliance has always served, you know, to provide the ANC with some direction. Firstly, secondly, of course, when it came to elections after 1994, support, especially during the election campaigns, and of course, bringing members to support the African National Congress, seen as the leader of the alliance partners. I think there is some legitimacy in their claim, both in the claims of the SACP and in the claims of COSATU, that they were merely being used as election fodder. There's been a kind of a breakdown in proper communication, proper consultation, clearly, you know, around issues around, as Sadumo again spoke about on this channel this morning, you know, around labor broking, and you know, it's been an ongoing issue for the last 5 years, you know, and one would have assumed that the ruling party in government would have done something, you know, that would have satisfied an alliance partner like COSATU. I got a sense from the speeches that I heard the other day from both Bladen Zamandi and Sadumo, that they see a new, much better, much happier relationship with the ruling party, with the African National Congress going forward. Of course, both the party, both the SACP and COSATU preferred Cyril Ramaphosa as the next president of the ANC. So I think they are hoping that, you know, it would be a different kind of relationship that they had than the one they had with Jacob Zuma at the helm over the last number of years.
Yeah, well, I can see, Jackie, you sitting here nodding your head. What is your response to that?
Well, it's difficult. I just can't not conceive of a healthier and more effective and perhaps mutually beneficial relationship between the vanguard of workers, which is COSATU, and the vanguard of the poor, which is the Communist Party. How they are going to have a better relationship with one of the biggest black capitalists in this country. It defies logic, you know. Of course, we know that he does have a history in trade unions, but that identity fell away when white capital instructed him even to leave government and go into the private sector, and within a very short space of time became a multi-billionaire. He's been heavily invested in mining, for instance. But that's where we've seen historically the greatest resistance and revolt on the part of labor in this country, culminating in the massacre in Marikana, where he himself is right at the center of what culminated in that massacre of workers by police. So for leaders, supposed leaders of the working class and the poor, to say we look forward to a better relationship in terms of advancing the interests of workers and the poor with someone who just 5 years ago is highly associated with the mass murder of work? It shows you the lack of ethics in ANC politics today.
Well, Mohsin, just COSATU has said that they feel that this relationship will be strong because Ramaphosa is associated with the union. So let's just talk about that a bit. Say then, according to you, Jackie, there's then no relevance to that.
There is relevance, but I'm saying that identity died, was buried when Cyril Ramaphosa left government. The first democratic government, which was the government of national unity, which was a government that needed all the leaders, particularly from the side of the ANC, who had some expertise, some experience, to try and be there and see how this experiment with those who had been part of the apartheid government, because they were now together. That's why it was called the GNU, Government of National Unity. You had these two blocks who came from diametrically opposed camps, others from apartheid, others from who were for democracy. And it was just very difficult to understand what were the compelling reasons, which were far more important than the stabilizing these new guys in governance, who were very fresh and new in governance. Cyril Ramaphosa disappears from the scene. And then he comes back as a multi-billionaire. And the question then becomes, what brings him back to politics now? You know, it doesn't seem like it's for the advancement of the poor, because as an employer himself, he's shown himself to not have that much empathy for workers. Because if he did, instead of writing that email and coercing police commissioner or the Minister of Safety and Security to take concomitant action in Marikana, as a union leader, he would have known what to do. To say, no, let's facilitate a meeting between capital and labor. Let's sit down, let's iron out these issues. But instead, as a captain now, as a baron, you know, he just writes an email to say, get rid of these people so that production can continue and he can continue to profiteer. We also know that he was also doing this on behalf of white monopoly capital because of his interest in loaning. So these are the contradictions that this is our Trump. We have our Trump now, you know, Donald Trump. Donald Trump also staged a coup in America. He was not a politician, multi-billionaire, you know, with his forked tongue. He continues to do so. And then use the money to make his way. Well, where we are now, you see the tension there is, unilateral declaration of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, you know. So I don't know what's going to happen in South Africa.
I do think your point has come across. I want to give Mr. Mohsin just time to respond to that. But do you think that is a separation?
Look at Jackie's point about, you know, how is it possible for the representatives of the poor and the working class to pitch their support behind a person whose estimated wealth is at 5 billion rand, you know. So the ANC, in the ANC's lexicon, in their language, the phrase dealing with the contradictions has been there for a long, long time, you know. It's, and again, it has to now deal with the contradictions of having a Cyril Ramaphosa, who for now is the actual darling of the two alliance partners that, as I said, represent really the lower basis of our society. But if you just remember, just go back a bit to a decade ago, when they threw their weight behind Msolozi, you know, Jacob Zuma, who was then, Zuma could do no wrong, but it came off the back of, I think, what was earlier referred to as this neoliberal economic policies adopted by the Thabo Mbeki. And that was the main reason, I think, why both the SACP and COSATU put their weight behind Zuma at Polokwane, in the belief that an ANC ruling party in government under Zuma would be more labor, worker friendly and more pro-poor. And I think the unhappiness that has developed over the last years also fell victim to the factionalism that developed within the ANC. And now, of course, they're now elevating a new person, the new president of the ANC now, as the person hopefully will bring, the kind of media demands. But as I said, it's a contradiction in terms, and a contradiction that they're going to have to deal with. How they're going to deal with it, it's
well, those are questions that we will pose to Kasatu just in a short while from now. But let's just, before we do that, let's just hear the latest details from on the ground here at Nasrec. For that, we are joined by ANN7 reporter Calden Ongmo. She's been following the walkabout of the ANC president, Mr. Cyril Ramaphosa. Good afternoon to you, Calden. Just talk us through the walkabout. How has the experience been? What's been happening there?
We seem to have lost our reporter again, Calden Ongmo. We will try to get her back, of course. It seems to be quite difficult walking around with Cyril Ramaphosa and being on the phone.
Everyone wants a piece at this point, I can imagine.
Definitely. Well, we are going to just chat a bit more about it later, but we will try and get Calden Ong, of course. Let's just take a look a bit about what has been happening today. I mean, in regards to Kusatu and them saying, and we do have live visuals of Ramaphosa actually walking around a bit. So this was earlier, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, there we see the president of the African National Congress, Mr. Cyril Ramaphosa. Looks like he's making a purchase of an ANC t-shirt there. We do know that there are a number of stalls present here at Nasrec where people can buy regalia and put on their ANC t-shirts if they so choose. Chaos there as media is flocking around the brand new president of the ANC. President Cyril Ramaphosa. We waited about half an hour to 45 minutes for this walkabout to begin. We do know yesterday we saw the president of the country, Jacob Zuma, doing his walkabout, and today we are witnessing Cyril Ramaphosa, the president of the ANC, doing his. Hundreds of members of the media there trying to get that perfect picture, trying to get that glimpse of the newly elected ANC president, Mr. Cyril Ramaphosa. Let's find out what happened during that walkabout. We've got, well, hopefully we've got Calden Ongmo back on the line now. Calden, I'm hoping that you can hear us this time. Talk us through the walkabout.
Yes, definitely. I can hear you loud and clear. As I speak to currently, we are still inside the PBF hall. That's a Progressive Business Forum hall where, all the businesses from various industries have set up their stores, telecommunications, multi-choice, their banks like Nedbank, Chelsea, Telkom, their clothing stores, SA breweries, even Nelson Mandela, a small stall of Nelson Mandela stall, and even construction stalls are here. So at this given point in time, what is happening is the newly elected ANC president, Cyril Ramaphosa, is walking from one stall to the other, greeting, vendors inside the stalls. Most of them really excited to meet the new president. I even spoke to many of them. They're really excited, saying they consider themselves really lucky because they are one of the first few citizens getting pictures and shaking hands with the newly elected president. So that's how the atmosphere is inside the hall. But, with a number of journalists and media houses that's interested in tracking and walking about with the newly elected president, it's kind of difficult to go quite closer to him. But of course, when he went to the Nelson Mandela, museum, there were many people where he's even questioning them on various, some of the things they sell. Like, for instance, when he went to the museum, he asked them if the museum is running well, whether everything is up to scratch. When he goes to other stores, he's even purchasing some of the items there, like, T-shirts, and there are a few DVDs that some of the people are presenting to him. So it's a very light, meet and greet kind of situation inside the PBF hall. Earlier, he was outside where, ANC regalia clothing was being sold by the ANC members. There he was trying to see whether he can fit into large or double XL T-shirts. So he's sharing a light moment with the vendors inside the PBF hall. But he also met the multi-choice new CEO, and they were exchanging words and, like I said, the atmosphere inside this place where people are getting to take opportunity for people to take pictures with the newly elected president of the ANC, shaking hands with him. And it's a meet and a greet moment for them. But at this given point of time also, it's not clear whether he will be able to speak to the media, as there are hundreds of us just waiting to pose questions on him. But Abigail, what is very clear from this meet and greet and walkabout in the PBF hall is that the newly elected president is walking about with a treasurer general, that is Paul Mashatile. We also saw the PBF official, Daryl Swanpool, accompanying him in the walkabout, but there's no sight of the new deputy president or secretary general, a deputy secretary general. It's only Paul Mashatile that's accompanying him in this meet and greet.
Thank you so much, our reporter Calden Onkmuth there, joining us live from the walkabout that's happening with Cyril Ramaphosa. He is to meet the media. We do hope that he can come and make a bit of a turn here at the
Fingers
studio
crossed,
for us here in Nasrec. Yes, fingers definitely crossed. Well, we are joined in studio by our next guest, Bekin Charlie Kasatu, General Secretary, just to talk a bit about the alliance and what we can expect going further now with Cyril Ramaphosa as the president of the ANC. A very good afternoon to you, sir. Thank you so much for joining us here in studio.
Good afternoon.
First of all, let's just get your general reaction to the results that came out and the announcement of Cyril Ramaphosa as the new ANC president.
We have been expecting this. Of course, it's been a contested election, but we're the first one who came out against the odds and in a not unacceptable way from the ANC, where senators interfering in their internal organization by coming out and say to support Cyril Ramaphosa. We made these things informed by a number of reasons. Firstly, we were thinking that the ANC, whenever it comes to this kind of an election, it tear itself apart. And to avoid that happening in future, they should endorse the tradition that whoever becomes the deputy president should be the president when the incumbent president is no longer eligible. We were told many stories, were lectured by many people who, in our view, were not talking to the principal, but were talking and marking the man who was likely to be the president. We had our own reason in terms of that. We put it in the public domain that he was the founder, general secretary of the NUM. He was the convener in the formation of COSATU, bringing all the unions in our country together. He went to be the, you can say, the re-establishment of the ANC structures in the country in 1991. He went to business. I think he performed well. He came back in terms of those things. And one of the issues that we're talking about, we needed somebody who can stand firm on corruption and says corruption is not good. Corruption anyway is a problem everywhere. And take that particular stand and says those who are involved in corruption must be arrested, must be prosecuted, and money must be recovered in terms of those things. We haven't had any other ANC leaders that stand firm in terms of those corruption. That gave us hope. So when the delegates decided, because we're not voting delegates on these issues, so we make our call, we appeal to the delegates and to the branches, and in our view, many people appreciate what we're saying. But not only the delegates, I mean, even if we have put these views to the general South Africans, I think we'll have got support that he's the man that must lead in terms of the principle that we observe in dealing with those issues. We also said this is not going to be a blank check. We will not raise some of the issues before, but once he has been elected, we'll seek audience with him and say, this is our problem. The issue of the economy and the creation of jobs, to us, combined with the question of corruption, those are the primary things that the president of the ANC, from the 8 January statement, they should be top on the agenda, going to the State of the Nation, whoever will deliver it. We hope it is not going to be President Zuma, because from the State of the Nation, the ANC must be able to indicate what will they say in 2019, because by that time, in February this next year, the election, the road to 2019 should have been, will commence in relation to those issues. So we can congratulate the ANC that they have now gone up to so far. There were fears and doubt whether this conference will continue. When they spent 48 hours, almost 2 days, without adopting the credential, clearly demonstrate the division within the ANC. But it also highlighted the organizational coherence that you can spend 2 days just to accredit about 4,000 delegates. We think it's a clear indication that this is a movement in trouble.
Mr. Nchali, after the celebrations that took place yesterday, this morning there was clouds of controversy hanging over the elective conference with regards to issues around vote counting and specifically the position of SG. Has COSATU been informed on this controversy? We do know that an urgent sitting of the steering committee was called. We are getting reports that a second sitting has been called to try and find a way forward. What is COSATU's stance to this cloud of controversy hanging over the conference?
If the rumors that are circulating are correct, that there were about 68 delegates who were not in the voters' roll, who the commission in its wisdom allowed them to vote and put their vote in a sealed envelope. I think there's a mess that they did. Because what's the point of putting them in an envelope and go on and announce election? They should have said there is a matter that needed to be resolved, give it to the committee must finalize its work and they could make the announcement. Or at least they could have informed the plenary that there's still a matter of about 68 votes that are pending. I think in the wisdom of any person in the plenary will say, wait, don't tell us the result that I have cooked is going to create problem. There's something really that is worrying for us. Is it this election commission, the people who are dealing with those issues? And I think it's going to cause some problems, if that is true in terms of this allegation. There have been meetings since this morning. There are rumors that they will report at about 6. It makes us to be nervous in terms of why should took the whole day to discuss the status of 68 people who have voted in terms of those particular issues. And I think they need to be honest to themselves. This leadership that has been elected has to resolve those particular issues. But you can't run away from the constitutionality of the ANC and free and fair election. They have to do it and live with those particulars. So we hope that 6 o'clock, these matters will be resolved.
And also there are some people saying that the challenging of the results, it's casting a bad shadow on the ANC's talk about unity at this conference. Just to give us your reaction as to that.
Look, as COSATU, whenever we talk about unity, we ask ourselves, is unity for what? Why we want to be united? It can't be unity at all costs. And in the process of going for unity, you compromise the values that you stand for, because such unity is not going to hold. If you just bring people together to be seen to be not united, the only arbiter in terms of unity is the vote of the delegate, is the will of the branches that they represent, and nothing less and nothing more in relation to those particular issues. But it put this, it's a shadow, a bad shadow over this conference. And I think it just says to everybody, what is going on with this ANC? And start to peddle some rumors. Is this kind of a negotiated kind of an arrangement that the other people beside the delegates trying to work it out in a manner that you got a kind of a 3 each side in terms of dealing with those particular, which was something that was supposed to be happening when there was still nomination and being negotiated, and go back to the people and say, we are putting a combined kind of a list in this. It raised a number of issues, including whether the gender was not compromised in this kind of a deal. That is, because if the people were on one side, they can get so much votes on other position. Why on other position if people were consistent not to get the same numbers?
Mr. Mr. Nchali, what is your reaction to the top six, specifically due to the mixed slate in the top six? How does COSATU see this? Do you see this being able to run smoothly with possibly different ideas, different policy suggestions? How is this mixed slate top six going to move forward in a united way?
Look, as they should be guided by the resolution that we are taking up here. That's the only guarantee. It's not going to be personal in terms of I was in a particular camp and all those things. We think when people came out of this conference, they have to look back and say, what is our mandate? And each and every leader elected should be dealing with those issues. But there's another body, which is the bodies of the NEC, which in our view, in the past leadership term, they have not been giving leadership. Instead of having the top six accountable to them, it was the other way around. It was a question of patronage, that if I say bad things, which is supposed to be their responsibility, they were paying patronage kind of stuff that I should stand up and say, I have to defend the president with my life, fully knowing that if the president had that good news, then the president will compensate me for doing those issues. Because some of the people that were removed in the cabinet were the victim of standing up in the NEC and say this thing is wrong. So we hope that they will have learned that winning the leadership of the ANC is not a full package. They have to win the confidence of the people. Otherwise, they're going to be the leader of the ANC, but not leaders of government.
Now, COSATU has been quite vocal on the state capture issue, and let's say the challenges that they have in accordance to state capture. But when can we expect COSATU to speak up about the corruption that we see in the corporate section? Because we haven't heard you being quite vocal about the corruption happening in the corporate section as much as state capture.
No, I think you have not been listening to us in terms of the state capture. We're the first one when the Competition Commission talks about the collusion, the cartel and all those things, and we said to government, one of the reasons the business continue doing this thing is because of the penalty, the 10% that is given to people. In fact, big business is budgeted for this 10%. They do it and say, I'm going to do the collusion, and they use a nice word which the media seems to be promoting and says, no, if it's irregularities, if it's a collusion, it sounds softer than corruption. But the language of workers is corruption. Corruption is everywhere. That's why we said corruption, whether it's in a trade union, whether it's in the church, everywhere, people must stand up and say corruption is bad in dealing with those particular issues. But we went further and said even the corruption in the state enterprise got an element of private sector. It's not just the public sector or government doing corruption among government officials. In every corruption you look at it. You look corruption in ESCOM, there is a private sector. You look to corruption in the SAA, there is a private sector. You look corruption in the banks, there is a private sector. So corruption is corruption everywhere. It doesn't matter who's doing it. They must be arrested. They must be put in jail. Money loss must be recovered. So COSATU stand firm on the issues of corruption.
Just analyzing that topic a little bit closer. The issue of ABSA and the 1 billion rand loan from the Reserve Bank. Has COSATU been vocal on this issue? What is the stance?
We said there must be investigation because the explanation given on the different things from the Reserve Bank, it just says to us, it smells corruption. But you need to be able to go to court. Investigation should be done in terms of those issues so that you can, because if you go to court, it's not just sentimental that you need to be. Somebody must investigate, somebody must prove what has happened in this thing. Now we've got problems in terms of police. The corruption that goes with police in terms of being brought, in terms of the docket. Police are saying one individual policeman has to handle 20 cases, 20 dockets. And we can see to the quality that when it goes to court, how people have been released on murders, on rape, and all those things, because the evidence is not there. We've got problem in the NPA in terms of selecting cases. There are cases that are people arrested like in seven days they are in court. There have been people who have been arrested and just rotting in the waiting trial, and because there not seems to be a quicker, a highlight of a case. We said, why then they don't put a special unit as they did when there was a 2010 World Cup? People who are arrested today, within 3 days they were appearing in court because we're looking to satisfy the international community in terms of how we deal with those particular cases. But our view, whether it's the issues of the APSA, they must be investigated, and if people, information should be proven, and then they should be brought to book. But when you get different interpretation from the Reserve Bank, which is the one that gave the money, from other people, from the public protectors, the community get confused in terms of what are the real facts in terms of these issues.
Well, let's come back to the conference a little bit more and take a deeper focus on the results. Do you think there is a real danger that this conference can collapse if the results are not accepted? No, there's one, position that is being contested here in terms of the result is where the margins of difference are so small in dealing with those particular issues. That's why the committee dealing with this thing must be open, must be honest to itself. Because if it's not happened, it's not solved in terms of those issues, you run a risk of people who are dissatisfied going to court and say to court, can you solve this case? 68 people have voted. Their votes were not included in the counting of those things. It's highly likely the court will be asking why they're not dealing with those issues. And inadvertently, the court will then decide and say, open this envelope, let's look at the number of votes, and the court decide. If they do that, it will then say to the ANC, you are unable to resolve your internal problem, and people have to go to court. This road to the conference has been met by many court cases. And in all these court cases, and many of them, the court has been says you are working against your own constitution, you don't respect your own constitution, and the court says go back and sort this thing out.
Listen, Charlie, with regards to this elective conference, ANC delegates keep saying and emphasizing unity. They keep emphasizing that the ANC needs to come out victorious after this elective conference. Other voices are saying that the ANC has disappointed women and they have disappointed the youth when looking at the top six. Kasatu's reaction.
We can say the ANC should blame itself, because the people who are first complaining are the active role players in terms of those issues. The Women's League, for an example, in our view as outsiders, that they didn't support the principle of women fully. They supported Nkosazana Zuma in this particular way. And a few years down, in the 27, Nkosazana Zuma was in another slate. They did not vote for her in terms of those particular things. They went to Mangaung. There was silence on the question of women. The question people are asking, why now? What makes you to wake up in dealing with those issues? But even in doing that, they push for Nkosazana Zuma. That was their race card. Had they all voted as women in terms for the deputy president, I think maybe they could have done it a better way, because in our argument was that then who become the deputy president will be the president in future. But they didn't do that one. It's true that the conference has failed us in terms of women.
Well, thank you so much. We are going to ask you just to wait for a few minutes. We have Cyril Ramaphosa speaking now and addressing the media. Let's just cut live to that.
Views and approaches that were prevalent in the conference prior to the election. And we are very pleased. With that the membership has decided to give us, if you like, their own slate, their own leadership as the top six. And we believe that with the National Executive Committee, the same will prevail. And with that, we will be able, the ANC will draw a lot of strength, a lot of purpose, with regard to executing the tasks that we have been given. So thank you very much for gracing our conference. Things are going extremely well. They could not go better. And tomorrow we're getting ready for the closing of the conference, when everybody will then go home and go and have a great Christmas. And I wish you all a good rest period. I know that you've been spending sleepless nights being here like all of us, but it's all for a very worthy cause. And thank you for being part of this cause. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, media. Thank you very much.
Has he gone to court? Thank you very much.
Guys. All right, well, you're currently seeing on the Insta.
Well, that was the ANC President Cyril Ramaphosa addressing the media, really his first address as the official president of the African National Congress. We still have Mr. Beki Nchali joining us in studio. Mr. Nchali, COSATU has always been very vocal about Cyril Ramaphosa and COSATU's preference in having him as the ANC president. Also issues with President Jacob Zuma in the past, COSATU barring President Jacob Zuma from your events. Talk us through why that stance was taken and why COSATU felt so strongly about this issue.
This is the interest of our members. We took time to come to this decision. As other people have been saying within the studio before, that one of the people who was supporting Jacob Zuma in 2007 was COSATU, very vocal. And in the beginning of his journey, in the first terms, I think there were times when we were even making statements that we were happy in the alliance, that Comrade Zuma was handling the alliance in many ways that was different from Thabo Mbeki in terms of consultation. And we made some progress in some other areas. But I think we were so overexcited that we move our eyes off the ball, hoping that President Zuma would be addressing this particular issue. And in that space, other interests took over. People were closer to him more than us and engaging him in terms of what needed to be done in that particular direction. And the tension in the alliance started coming up openly in terms of the president not consulting, the NEC taking decisions that were not pro-workers. For an example, in terms of the e-tolls, we were vocal in terms of the e-tolls. We told the ANC that people in Gauteng, they're not going to vote for the ANC in terms of the e-toll. We raised the issues of the labor brokers in dealing with those particular issues. And instead of banning them, we felt that the people in the ANC, whose majority, in fact, in our view, are the owners of the labor brokers. So it started to create tension in dealing with those particular issues. The issues of Nkandla and many other issues make us to lose confidence to President Zuma. We tried to talk to the ANC, which is one of the accusations that the leadership of the ANC were saying, the public pronouncement on those issues, and says, but why, if you've got problem, why don't you go to us and tell us than speaking publicly in terms of those particular issues?
Well, let's just go across to our reporter, Giovanni Machana. I am hearing that she has an update for us from the grounds here at Nasrec. A very good afternoon to you, Giovanni. Just tell us what has been happening and where are you at this moment?
Good afternoon to you and good afternoon to the viewers. We do understand after yesterday's high of emotions in electing the ANC's top six, a number of people have gone home, calculated the numbers, and things just don't mean to make sense. There is a reported 68 votes which have not been included in the mathematics of those who voted for one or the other, those who have sustained themselves on not voting. And it seems that those 68 have now concluded with speculations of whether those 68 are members who just didn't come to vote and did not write themselves down as abstaining, or could it be the special votes that a group of people have decided that is the conclusion they've come about. This brings to question, why would the IEC forget the 68 votes? And interestingly so, if all 68 votes are missing from all 6 positions, why then question only the Secretary General? This brings to question the slates that happened before the top 6 was decided on. It seemed that all was well when the top 6 seemed to have a slate of unity, a mixed kind of ideas coming together, understanding that such a conference for the ANC is a festival of ideas, and the top 6 was definitely that. Questions arise on whether these 6 votes were also bogus delegates who were said to have been on the list, who weren't really alive, who had no ID numbers, no identity linked to them. So a number of questions are arising. This has been in the steering committee meeting being discussed on the way forward. We've heard from 2 provinces, being KZN and Northwest, saying that should they question one position, why not just have a whole rerun of all 6 positions? This kind of puts strain to everybody here at Nasrec, who is waiting for the conclusion of the ANC 54th conference, understanding that on day 1 there was a delay on the 16th of December in terms of the starting due to the court processes. We also understand that the group of Senzo Mngunu have gone out to say should this not be resolved, they might even think about going to court. This obviously will have a delay on the conference, understanding that the court processes that the provinces alone had to go through did delay the national conference. Now understanding all 9 provinces under one roof, going to court would only lead to a further delay. Understanding that new leadership does need to be chosen and will be chosen at this conference, it seems that a sidetrack from the policies, the most important part, the implementation of this better life for all of the ANC, is being sidelined. Will this be the focus? How many days now, how many hours will they have to put concrete policies in place? And which leadership will be chosen? Will it be the top 6 staying in their positions? Will there be a voting yet again, time again taken from it to implement these policies moving forward for the ANC in the next 5 years to come?
Well, thank you so much, our reporter Giovanni Machani there on the ground, giving us an update as to what has been happening today and what we can expect. Well, just coming back to our discussion here in the studio, Mr. Ntali Chali, let me just ask you a question. Ramaphosa said they are busy voting for the NEC right now. So as to the NEC being voted for and picked, and then they should deal with the bigger issue, or the bigger crisis rather, that is on the ANC NEC today. Can you just give us your opinion? Do you think that is the best decision to make, that them deal with the crisis as of now? Or do you think that this should be resolved with the sitting committee?
There are 2 processes. The question of dealing with the question of the leadership should not be holding the conference, because not everybody is involved in that particular process. There's a committee dealing with those issues. One of the biggest items on the agenda of the ANC, of this conference, is to deal with the policy questions, because this leadership coming out of this meeting, they need to know what needed to be done in dealing with those issues. We went to the policy conference around June. There are recommendations in terms of dealing with those issues. Those recommendations must be adopted. So we should be going in commission in dealing with those issues. But the question of this matter hanging, I think it distracts many people. I think they are losing faith in dealing with this question of the policy conference. Luckily, of course, is that 80% of those policy recommendations were adopted, were finalized by the policy conference, except very few, which is like the nature of the monopoly capital, whether it's white in dealing with those issues, the issues of the land, whether the land should be compensated in dealing with those issues. So there's a few that needed to be resolved by this conference, which the body of the conference, the many people here supposed to be going to commission, which we started before lunchtime. But as you can see, people are mingling down in this thing. In fact, there are many delegates who are just outside there waiting for this matter to be resolved in dealing with those issues. I think there's a lost opportunity in terms of the quality of those resolutions, and it needed to be managed properly. Otherwise, people would be said everybody who came here came with one purpose, to elect the leadership, and without giving them a proper mandate, people went back home. But I think it's still within the remaining hours. If you can get better chairperson on how to manage the commission, they will have to adopt some of this resolution. The more difficult matter may not be resolved here. Some of them are not, I think, ideological issues, whether you should be spending time to debate whether the monopoly capital is white or whether you're talking about monopoly capital in general. Those matters will never, and the discussion will not end up in this conference.
Mr. Nchali, if you would allow me to just backtrack, I really want to pick your brain on COSATU's stance with regards to the current president of South Africa, Mr. Jacob Zuma. You mentioned that COSATU had lost confidence in the president, and you mentioned a number of issues. One of them that came up was the issue of Nkandla. There was no corruption found against President Jacob Zuma in that specific case. Why then are you of the stance that Nkandla is one of the issues that caused COSATU to lose confidence in President Jacob Zuma?
It's because President Zuma refused to implement the remedial action that was made by the public protector. He challenged it. He went to court. It's in the court after spending so much money and time that his lawyer somersaulted and says, please tell me how much to pay in this thing. There was no need for him to go to court. In fact, to the court that he ends up saying, I don't know, or to tell me, or to tell him whether the remedial action by the public protectors are compulsory for him to implement. This is a state president, and he got a number of legal people around him in dealing with those issues. The question of the 783 cases in terms of dealing with those particular issues, all those issues make us losing hope in terms of those things. Going to the election in 2016, the main issue people were raising was about him in terms of dealing with the parties. As I was indicating earlier, that we went to the ANC. We didn't just go publicly. We said to the ANC, can we meet and discuss this particular issue? There was no discussion. The question of consultation, when the Pravin was removed, we were never consulted about these things. And when Des Van Rooyen was appointed, when Pravin was removed earlier, the indication and the reasons given was that he's a minister with capacity to sort out the local government, So we're convinced in terms of this thing in good faith. We only know later that no, the president was not happy about Pravin taking a stance in terms of the SAA and giving money in terms of those things. When Tantanene was appointed by the president, we're so happy. But when he was removed and the manner in which was removed make us very uncomfortable. When Pravin was removed, in the manner that it was humiliating for that matter, call overseas on the road show to encourage investment in terms of those things. No consultation at all with COSATU. We still sought a meeting with the ANC to discuss this particular. But when it was not coming, our member says, no, we need you to come publicly, put our stance on these particular issues. After everything has failed to consult with the ANC, they came to the conclusion they came to and said, we have lost hope in this particular president. We have invited him at that time to address our May Day. We invited the ANC to deploy people to address the May Day, which indeed people on the ground came back to us as leadership of the COSATU and said, you are sending a wrong message. You can't say you have no confidence on this matter, but you invite him again to address these particular matters. They refused. Members on the ground, they refused. They said no one will speak in that particular meeting, and then indeed it did not meet. We had met with the president and the ANC in the alliance, in the political council twice since then in terms of those issues. We went to the policy conference having these matters being raised. When it was raised here, yesterday, 2 days ago here, by the president in his report, we thought the president was agitating the members here that says, if COSATU did not allow me to address them, how do you allow them to address you in terms of those issues. And we could see the reaction immediately then thereafter, that people, when COSATU and the party were to give the message of support, there was an issue and said, no, don't allow them to speak for a number of reasons, allow the international guests to give a message of support. Even when we were to address the message of support yesterday, there were fear among the delegates here in this conference that COSATU and the party are going to respond to the President Zuma's report in terms of those particular issues. But we're not in that leverage, in that level that we were to fight our issues in the media in terms of those issues. We wanted to discuss them in the meeting. So we're compelled to come out in terms of the president and say it. And in our statement, we didn't just rubbish President Zuma. We said, look, he spent his 10 years in Robben Island for the interests of this country. He went to exile. He's go through the ranks of the ANC, and he came back. He was instrumental in bringing peace in KZN, for that matter. He came back to government at this particular stage. He made some positive issues in terms of those issues. His weaknesses, as we see it, was the question of money in terms of dealing with those issues, and his friendship with the Guptas in terms of those things. And we said at that time, the president must resign when people still love him, so that they can remember him, of his contribution. Staying longer in terms of those particular issues, people will remember him of the Guptas, of the Inkandla, and of course of these cases. We don't want to have a president of the African National Congress only to be remembered by his mistake in terms of those
negative
issues.
things. We hear you. Thank you very much, Mr. Nchali, for your time this afternoon and for engaging us for such a long time. We really appreciate you talking to us. That was Mr. Bheki Nchali, COSATU General Secretary, joining us here at our NASREC studio. We are going to take a quick break. More news and updates on the other side. Stay with us.
Comrade Cyril Ramaphosa as the new president of the African National Congress.